Suzanne, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning.
Of course. So Suzanne is running for State Representative Position 1 in District 4. Mm-hmm. Suzanne, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to run?
Okay, all right. A little bit about myself. I was raised in Libby, Montana, which is about 3 hours east of here. And I basically lived there most of my life, went to the Flathead Valley Community College, started work at Libby Dam, which is a hydroelectric plant, and also ran by the Corps of Engineers. While I was working at Libby Dam, I met my husband, Dean, who worked for the Corps of Engineers here at Fairchild Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. And so we dated for a few years. We got married. I moved to Spokane. I've been here since the end of November of 1997, so almost 25 years. So my children and my grandchildren have all went to school in the Central Valley School District, and Spokane Valley is my home, definitely my home. This is where I live, this is where I want to be, and this is where I'll spend the rest of my life. So that's a little bit about how I got to Spokane. Once I moved here, my husband and I did have a child together, so his name is Matthew, and so I stayed home for a year. Then I went to work for Associated Industries, and they are an association that provides services and benefits for manufacturing companies. And I was hired as their to do workers' comp claims management and also support for their safety officer. And after being there for a couple of years, I saw a position advertised at Associated Builders and Contractors to be a workers' comp program manager. So it would be like a step up. It would be a promotion. Upward mobility in my career. So I applied for the job, and I was selected. And so when I went to work for Associated Builders and Contractors, I just really felt like that was my home. I just finally, found a place that I felt like this is where I want to be, and this is where I want to build my career. So I worked as their workers' comp program manager and worked directly with the contractors and their employees and helping them to get the employees back to work and making sure that they had, good medical care when they were injured. And really the thing that made me fall in love with Associated Builders and Contractors, they're small businesses, and they're family oriented. Like their employees are really, part of their family. And so just seeing the ends that they would go to re-employ somebody that was injured and make sure that they, that they could get them back to work and that they had a successful life, that the injury wasn't just something that, happened and took them out of the workforce. So that was just so, touching to me and really inspired me to do more and to be more, more involved with ABC and with different programs. And so I did move up from there moved up from the workers' comp program manager. I was actually then promoted to the president and CEO in 2016. Wow. And I was there for 6 years. So I'm telling you a little bit about myself, then what happened. So I was there as the president and CEO for 6 years. And I will tell you that I have had feelings like I felt like God was really calling me to run for office for quite some time. And I think, I'm going to say I know. I made excuses. I made negotiations. I negotiated with God saying, well, not yet because of this. I need to do this. I need to do that. But what happened is when we went into the pandemic, and Governor Inslee shut down the state. And he shut down private commercial construction and residential construction. So he left public construction. So any public works like the Seattle Convention Center and bridges, highways, things like that, were able to continue working. But he shut down private commercial and residential. So he picked and chose who he felt was essential. And so during that time,
which is arbitrary and subjective.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and it just goes to his emergency power. And what are we at now? 855 days. It's something like that. I know we did hit 850 a couple of days ago. So anyway, so that was. But when that happened, I had my members, and again, these are people that love their families, love their home, love their country, and they're calling me and saying, "What are we going to do? I don't know if I can be on the sidelines for 6 weeks, or when are we going to go back to work? How soon can we go back to work? How soon can we get back. Are you talking to the governor? Are you talking to, Olympia? What's going on? And I was, on the phone, 12 hours a day. I mean, I'd be on the phone with one person. I could see my voicemail filling up. And so we were trying to get a hold of the governor and really just get his attention and say, what can we do to go back to work? And he ignored us. He completely ignored us for 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, then he did, basically gave word to the construction community, I'll talk to you. I'll create a roundtable. I'll see what we can do to get the, commercial and residential construction back to work. At any rate, we worked really hard. We were able to get everybody back to work within a couple of months. We had to follow the safety protocol that the governor and his team put together, and which, we're contractors, we know how to pivot on a dime. So we were able to do that, get the, safety equipment, PPE, everything ready, up to go, got people back to work. At any rate, we, worked just so hard to get everybody back to work. And then we made it through 2020. We go into 2021, and part of my job is to advocate, to be part of like grassroots efforts, know what legislation is being passed, what's being dropped, how's that going to affect my members, and
ABC, and to clarify, ABC also host classes that are free to just about anyone.
Yes.
And you guys bring in speakers to talk about civics and the legality of certain things, and you really do try to prop up not just the construction industry, but people that are associated with that industry, accountants and so on.
Yes.
So if people haven't checked it out, I think it's something very good for them to go look at.
I would. Yes. And I'll even say, I'll give a plug for their website. So it's www.abcipc.org.
Yeah.
And all of the classes and everything that we do, the services and benefits are on the website. So, but at any rate, what happened, and this is what really made the decision for me. We went back into session in 2021, and we didn't know how we were going to recover from COVID. We didn't know what the economy was going to look like. Everybody was unsure of what was happening. Nobody had went through a pandemic before. And the governor and the Democratic Party came back in, and within 2 weeks passed more taxes, more regulations, and more fees on people that were already down. And you're kicking people when they're down. You're going to impose these, and we don't even know how the economy is going to come out of this. And that was where I was like, okay, you know what? It's time. I need to run. This is my kind of my breaking point. So I went to my board of directors and told them, I want to run for office, and I need to be retired from ABC by the end of the year. And so we worked out, a succession plan. We had, we have somebody that replaced me and went through that whole process. But it was really at that point, it was like, you know what? I need to take the skills and the abilities and the knowledge and all of my experience and connections and go to Olympia. I felt like that was the breaking point of I need to get there and fight for the common, for working people and small businesses.
I mean, at ABC too, you negotiate too. Negotiate contracts, you negotiate with L&I and so on behalf of businesses. So negotiation is part of the skill of being the president at ABC, or even one of the workers' comp agents at ABC. I know a little bit about it. I have a client who had who was part of ABC, and they had someone who had fallen off a roof and broke their back and was in a pretty bad place, and he did everything he could to, bring him back to work and so on. So it is a fantastic, absolutely fantastic organization that really just wants people to understand hey, this isn't the end of the road for you just because you had an accident, and you have an employer who really supports you and will take you from a construction position and put you into the office and have you do things and learn a different side of the business. So it is really a valuable resource. But we're not here to talk about ABC. Yeah. That was just
right. But thank you for that, because that is very true. And I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. And that's like I said, that's what made me fall in love with the organization is finding the employers like that were so dedicated to their employees that they would create a job to employ that person in the office because they could no longer do physical work. So that was
Yeah. So let's jump into your survey. So on the survey, question 4 of life, God created man in his image. The duty of civil government is the protection of innocent human life from conception until natural death. The issue application is that Washington State's reproductive privacy rights law allows minors to obtain abortions without parental consent. Additionally, this law requires taxpayer-funded abortions on demand. Late-term abortions are legal throughout all ninths of pregnancy in Washington because of the vague way that viability is defined in this law. Our response is that the reproductive privacy rights laws need to be challenged and or repealed at both the state and local levels. And you responded to 10, strongly agree. And so now with the overturning, I keep saying passing, but the overturning of Roe v. Wade and giving power back to the people, it couldn't be more important to get people into the legislature that will fight for life. And so what's your position on abortion in general, and how are you going to go to the legislature and push back against pro-choice and frankly, immoral legislature? So,
I'm what I'm going to say. I'm pro-life. I feel like, I'm just, while I was saying this, I'm just going to say what I was thinking. What I was thinking while you were saying that I think that I've already seen Governor Inslee on press conferences. In fact, I just saw on the news last night that he has an executive order emergency to provided $1 million more to Planned Parenthood to pay for the surplus of people that are going to be coming into the state of Washington for abortions.
Well, within 2 hours of Roe being passed down, the governor of California and the governor of Oregon signed a pact to basically say we are going to be a safe haven for
we're sanctuary states, and we're going to have everybody in. And so that's what, I first of all, so that was what was crossing my mind when you were saying this. And so what I would say to your viewers and to the people watching this is it's more important now than ever before that you vote people into the the legislature. And I'm just going to say, just because I know how it breaks up there, so really it's more important now than ever that you vote Republican candidates into the legislature, because that's the only way we're going to stop the governor. Right now, we have the governor Inslee, then he has the majority. We have the majority in the House. The Democrats have the majority in the House and the Senate. So a lot of his plans and his design are passed through the legislature. And so in order to be able to stop that and put the brakes on, we have to have people in the legislature and the Senate that are conservative. We absolutely have to. So it's more important than ever that you vote, and especially vote in the primary. Please vote in the primary, August 2nd. But it's really important that you vote. But I'm getting back to your question, because I did veer from that. But what I wanted to say is I think that there should be reasons that could be abortions could be performed, and that would be in if the mother's life was in danger, if there was incest or rape. The thing that I think we need to define in the legislature is make sure that we have full and clear definitions of what that is.
Right.
What, and how is that going to be determined and when? And then, like you said, in Washington State, we have, at least from my understanding, they're legal up to 24 weeks, which is a viable I want to say pregnancy. The fetus or the baby, let's...
fetus is just Latin for baby.
Right. Yeah. But the baby can live outside of the mother, at 24 weeks. We see it all the time. We see, people...
they get intubated and...
Right. And so, to have that, to have it legal up to 24 weeks is just... I think, in moral, it's wrong. It's, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, at any rate.
It's against God and it's against science. We are who we are. All of the DNA that makes you who you are, scientifically, is there the minute that sperm meets that egg.
Yes.
So viability isn't even a question, because a child isn't viable when they're out of the womb. So let's say you give birth to a child. Okay, you're viable now, but go feed yourself. Well, you can't feed yourself.
Yeah.
So when does a child truly become viable?
Right.
Well, when they can feed themselves, right? Because that's the argument is that, well, you're only viable and you're only your only life when you're able to essentially stand on your own 2 feet. That's the argument. And it's like, well, then at what point? Because I may have learned to walk when I was 2. But someone else may not learn to walk till they're 4. But so what does viability really mean? So I think it's really vague, and that's what we touch on is that it's so vague about what viability is in the law that needs to be repealed. Frankly,
absolutely.
So now in the instances of incest and rape, if you were to, let's say, propose a bill or go against the bill that had been proposed to limit abortion to these specific circumstances, what would be the criteria that someone would need to go through in order to prove these things?
Yeah, and that's really what I mean, and honestly, I don't have the answers right now. I don't. I mean, and that's where I'm questioning how do we put those into play and how do we make that determination? Because, with incest or rape, do we have to go through the trial process and, to prove that it's rape? And then at that point, the pregnancy is going to probably, they're probably going to give birth by that point because the judicial system is so slow. So, I'm not sure. And that's really something that I feel I need to have more education on and more background. I think those things, they absolutely need to be clarified, but I would guess that the majority of the public has the same idea, the same thoughts as I do, is we don't really know. Like, yeah, we think that's, that's, in the case of incest or rape, but then who's going to make that determination? Is the doctor going to make that determination? Is the patient going to make that determination? Is the court system going to make that determination? So those things need to be defined. I mean, they need to be defined and easy to interpret.
Right. And I think that if you just take things, we seem to convolute everything in law, right? And it shouldn't be, things should not be complicated. If you can't read it and understand it like a child, then it shouldn't be law, in my opinion. However, that's not reality. But I think that and I would just propose that if we make an exception, so if there is an exception in the law, that it needs to be, we can prove rape with rape test kits. We've been doing it for decades. We can prove incest through DNA tests of the baby in the womb. So these things are provable in science. And I would say that like you said, how do you get this through the system fast enough? I think that it would be between patient and doctor, and that the doctor would have to have sufficient evidence to prove that it was an instance of rape, an instance of incest, in order to carry out the abortion. And I think that we need to hold doctors accountable if they were to perform an abortion that was outside of the law. And I think that a lot of doctors, won't perform abortions because they understand that it is life. And when you have doctors that are willing to stand on their moral grounds, I think that we live in a better society, because not only are they going to stand for life, but when you go in with an issue, they really want you to get better. Right. And so I would just say that I think that would be, to me, it would be the only way I could see that exception being written into law. As a conservative, as a Bible-believing Christian, the life is held at the highest standard in the Bible, and we should not waver on moral issues, period. Now, the thing about exception is that it's been used to fuel and feed abortion for convenience for 5 decades. Right. So I think it's important also that people understand that less than 1% of all abortions are in these exceptional circumstances. The other 99% are purely for convenience. And that's something that I think people really cannot comprehend in their mind when you talk about the scale of abortion over 50 years, right, and the amount of lives that have been aborted over 50 years. So, so you would be willing to go into the state legislature and say, hey, I'm not wavering on this issue except in these circumstances? I would say, I don't.
I don't know that it would come to the state legislature at this point because it's a statute, and so it's a law. It's actually, it was an initiative passed by the people in the state of Washington. So I don't know that it would come to the legislature, and especially in the climate that we're in right now. But if it did, but that would be my stance. If it came, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify so people understood exactly what your position is on life, so I appreciate that. And then we'll move on to issue B on life. So the same question 4, issue B. The issue application is that in January 2022, a new law went into effect in Washington State allowing minors to obtain gender reassignment, treatment, and surgery without parental consent, HB 5904. Another corresponding bill forbids insurance companies from denying coverage for these procedures and further forbids insurance companies from notifying policyholders, i.e. the parents of this coverage, SB 5313. The response is that this new initiative should be repealed and or resisted because it is 1, an affront to the integrity of life as God created it, male and female in his image, and 2, an assault on parental rights and responsibilities to direct, provide, and pay for the medical care of their children. You responded at 10 on both of those responses. Excuse me, and that you commented on the first issue that you also feel that these children need their parents' help and support before they do something that's serious and life-altering. I know someone who had gender alteration at the age of 40, and she is disabled because she is ashamed and cannot engage publicly. And my heart just goes out for her because it's such a hard thing when you have a lot of times trauma is what prompts these things. And so my heart just goes out for her because it is so hard. And when you don't have when you feel like you don't have community support and the support of your friends, or that maybe you can't confide in someone, it is difficult. But I think it's even more difficult when you're a minor and you're going through puberty and all these things. Yeah. And like you said, you can't even lean on your parents for support because if you go to you can just go to the doctor on your own. Right. So would you work to repeal this and amend it?
Absolutely. And that's what, because, is again, because children, I mean, I think that, like right now, we're talking about gun legislation where we don't want someone to be able to purchase a gun until they're 21, but they can change their gender. I can tell you from my personal experience or my life, when I was a kid, I was a tomboy. And that's what we called them then. I was tomboys.
My wife was too.
Yeah, like sports. I was, I went hunting with my dad. I split wood. I mean, I was, that's what I like to do. And then when I, moved into middle school and high school, it's like, oh, okay, now I like being a girl. And so I just feel like if in that age, or if, and these times, how it is right now, is if I would have been a tomboy, that I would have had people in the schools and doctors, pressuring me or telling me or suggesting, grooming me, yes, that, well, maybe you should be a boy. And I think, what if that happened to me? And I was one of those kids where that would have been, in the circumstances that we see right now, I would have been one of those kids that they said, well, maybe you should have been a boy. Maybe we need to get you, gender altering, medication and stop you from, puberty. And so at that age, I wouldn't have, it's just like being groomed for anything else, whether you're being groomed for, sexual abuse or being groomed for, any other abuse is that you're being told that this is what you need to do, or this is what you should do, and this is who you are, when you don't really even know who you are. Right. And honestly, when I, as a child, was, when I said I was a tomboy, and I didn't even, that's what sexual preference wasn't even a thought. Didn't even know.
Kids don't think about sexuality.
They really don't. No. And then to say, so anyway, I would, yes, absolutely, because I think that what we're doing is we're really, we're bringing up a generation that are going to wake up in the next 10 years and go, what did I do? And it's not just the gender altering drugs, but they're also doing surgeries that are that are changing who they are. And honestly,
and you can't go back from that.
Right. And the thing is, there's two genders. There's male and female. That's it.
Simple.
It's simple. So I just feel really sad, and just with my grandchildren and just things that they've been telling me, like in the schools, and it's almost, when I want to say, a fad. It's like, it's
that's
just,
actually a good way to put it. It is.
And it's
like a trendy to be
it's trendy to
transgender because that's what they're putting out in the media and that's what's in the forefront.
Right, and everybody's supposed to accept it and love and that's, I mean, I feel like we can accept and love people, but do we, but to decide that, well, they need to be a different gender or that they, because they dress a certain way. I mean, it's just kind of like it's really counterintuitive from what they're saying is like we're supposed to just love everybody just the way they are. But now we're saying, but if you dress like a boy, then you should probably be a boy. Yeah,
and the thing is, this isn't even an this is so ideological.
Yeah,
because, well, I can't speak today.
Yeah,
and the reason why it is because it's not grounded in science.
Right.
It's not grounded in any form of reality. I feel like I feel like I ought to be a girl today because of whatever has happened. And usually it's trauma or being bullied at school and so on, which are horrendous things. But instead of dealing with the trauma, like we have for 50 years, we've been dealing with this issue for 56 years. We have mountains of literature on how to deal with gender dysphoria from a psychological perspective. We've been doing it for 60 odd years, if not longer, but we have literature, stacks of it for decades. And now all of a sudden it's saying, well, let's ignore all the literature. Let's ignore all the studies, all of the positive work that's been done to help people through these traumatic events and through this crisis. Let's throw that out the window and just say, no, it's okay. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And we're physically altering people permanently.
Yeah,
physically altering them permanently, and no, I agree. It needs to stop, and and especially because it is children. It's people that like I said, you were working at, and we did actually pass in the state of Washington that you can't buy certain guns until you're 21 years old. You can't buy alcohol. You can't. There's so many things that you can't do until you're 20. You can't rent a car unless you're 25. But you can change your gender without talking to your parents at 13.
And have them pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what they say. They say, well, we won't inform your parents, but they're going to get a bill in the mail from the insurance company. So, or is the state paying for it?
And they could be, because I know Planned Parenthood does, and from what I understand, Planned Parenthood does pay for gender altering drugs. And yes, you can walk
Which is money that they receive from the state.
Right.
Or the federal government.
Both.
Yeah. So the reality is that even if parents don't pay for it, they still have access to it, and the parents could be none the wiser.
Right.
Your son or daughter could be taking hormone blockers or whatever, or even taking hormone-changing pills, and you would have no idea. It would probably take you years to figure it out.
And if your child was on an antibiotic and you sent him to school, you have to actually give permission to the nurse to administer that penicillin or antibiotic. But a child can go to school and take gender altering drugs and
it's okay.
It's okay.
It seems like there's just a massive double standard on this issue.
Yeah.
And I think we really need to fight against this issue and stand for life and period in the legislature. And this is a life issue because it impacts the lives of those children, not just the children. It impacts the lives of the parents too, because there is trauma leading up to this, whatever that may be. Then the child goes through this and just makes these decisions on their own with no counsel, probably feels alone as it is, and now they feel more alone because they're going through this alone. And then on the other side of this, they have years and years and years of trauma after the fact that now the family has to be there, rally around them, which they ought to, but it puts more and more pressure on families because children are not engaging with their parents about issues that should be dealt with in a counseling session rather than with drugs.
Right.
And it's just mind-blowing to me that we have come to this point. I mean, if you'd have told me 10 years ago I'd be having this conversation, I would be just mind blown. And so it's just the fact we're even having the conversation just is bewildering to me. And I grew up in England, and I was not a very good student in school. And so, in fact, I would take every opportunity not to go to school. And when I was about 13, I had someone from CPS, the equivalent of CPS, come to my door. She came in, my mom sat with me and the counselor, and she said, if you don't start going, they have very strict rules in the UK about schooling. If you don't go to school, we're going to send your mom. We're probably going to send your mom to prison. And I looked at her, and I was 13, and I looked at her and I said, do you think I'm stupid? You're going to send a single mom of 3 people to school, to prison because I won't go to school? That doesn't make any sense. And I just walked out the room. I was pretty rebellious. And not saying I was right or anything like that or condoning it, but the point was that I knew at that time that they couldn't control the family unit because she's my mom. You're not going to take my mom away from me. But what we're now doing is telling the parents, we're going to take your children from you.
Right.
For things that are for medical decisions and psychological decisions that the parent ought to be making and helping their child through. We're saying, the state's saying, no, we're just going to take that away from you. You don't have the right for that anymore. And then the question is, what's next, right? So I'm glad you're going to go to the legislature, and if you are elected, you're going to go in there and you're going to fight against these things because they're abhorrent and they're against God first and foremost. And I think they're against. I would say they're against the constituency. Is that the feedback you've been getting?
Absolutely. And that's what you knew. And I think that, part of the issue bringing in like the sex curriculum into the schools and then, and just talking to like 5-year-olds and apparently it doesn't start until 3rd grade, but at any rate, just talking about, the sex curriculum that is in the school is also, it's just crazy that they're able to talk to children about things that, like we said, children don't even really think about sex until you bring it up.
Well, my argument would be it's uncomfortable enough talking to your own children about sex. Who are you to go and talk to someone else's child? I mean, who are you as a person? I'm not saying who are you as in how dare you. I'm saying who are you?
Right.
Like what's your motive? Why do you think this is okay? And I just come back to it's grooming. 20 years ago, you'd get locked up for that.
Right.
Maybe even 10 years ago, you'd get locked up for that. If a teacher started talking to my 5 or 6-year-old about sexuality, they'd be registered sex offender 10 years ago. And now it's like, no, it's okay. You can talk to them about sexuality. My grandson he's 5. He doesn't know whether one day he wants to be Batman, the next day he wants to be Cinderella. It's not about sexuality. It's fantasy as in make believe. I'm going to go play. I'm a child. I live in this wondrous world where I have this imagination. That's all it is. It's imagination. It isn't grounded in actual intent.
Right.
He doesn't intend to be Batman. He doesn't intend to be Cinderella. He knows he's playing.
Right.
And the fact that we have now to protect our children from those who we are supposed to entrust with education is just, it's insanity. It really is insanity. So let's talk about education.
Okay.
Since we're on that topic. On the survey, question 8 on the survey, it is fundamental right and responsibility of parents to direct the education of their children. The issue application is critical race theory and the 1619 Project and other like-minded programs are based on incorrect assertions and false narratives about our nation's history and culture. Additionally, critical theory, i.e. cultural Marxism, an ideology based on victim categories such as race, can be found on specific curricula. But it is also a worldview that influences many academic disciplines. The underlying assumptions of critical theory drive the formation of policies and initiatives in many government schools. And the response is that the above-cited programs and ideologies should not be implemented in taxpayer-funded schools. You responded at 10. This is another thing where we're just imposing ideology on children.
Right.
And we're victimizing children, one set of children, and telling the other set of children that they're oppressors.
Right.
How are we going to get this fixed at a state level so we can stop this from happening at local levels?
My thought would be is to have funding, so the funding for students to follow the student or to have a waiver so that we're able to go to Christian schools or private schools. Because I think what happened, and it's not I think, I know that when you have open competition, you have open and fair competition, whether it's in the schools, in a business, whatever it is, then you end up getting better results on every level because they're competing with each other. And so they have to basically conform. Conform's a bad word, but I want to say
It's the apt word.
Right, it's the F word, but it's they need to then go with what do their customers want, or their, so what do the parents want, what do the students want? They will need to go with that. And so if we went to a more, like I said, private school, funding goes to the student, not the school, doesn't follow the school. There's waivers for people to buy, to put their children in private or Christian schools. I think that's actually going to be more effective in changing public schools than doing, legislation or trying to. And the legislation would be for those tax credits and that money, but to stop this, like the critical race theory in the schools, it's like something that now the teachers union has jumped on board, and it's something that they want to push, and it's their new agenda to push forward. So how do you stop that? I think you stop that by, again, opening up fair and open competition, and you pull your students out of public school, you put them in the school of your choice, and that's what you're saying to the public school. We don't agree with your curriculum. We don't want our child taught that curriculum or that ideology, because that's what it is. It's not curriculum, it's ideology.
Right.
So that's a
and we're not allowed to impose our ideology.
Exactly.
We aren't allowed to tell them you need to teach the Bible.
Because we can't pray even at school.
Right.
So
if we aren't allowed to impose our ideology, why are they allowed to impose theirs?
Right. And then, and I've, and from the critical race theory, that's when I've heard just from private citizens and people that I've talked to, both, I would say, people of color and people, that are I would say white, Caucasian, whatever, they're saying that's exactly what's happening. Is it's making the white, or the Caucasian students feel, like guilty or bad, and it's making the people of color feel like they're oppressed and they're not good enough,
and that the white person's evil.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's not helping anything. It's what it's creating more racism, because then you're polarizing the two,
creating further division. This is by design. This isn't a mistake.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer is a strategy that we know it has been used on both sides of the aisle, but we know that the Democrats over the past 5-6 years have really, really tried to use it. And the fortunate thing is, I think the Democrats look at black people like they're dumb. They aren't dumb.
Right.
The black community are very smart.
Right.
And they're waking up. And they're starting to see it for what it is.
Yeah.
You have ample examples of this in the media. Now people coming out and people are leaving the Democratic Party in droves because they're starting to realize, hey, guys, we've been lied to for the last 80 years.
Right. Yeah. And I just think I watched it was just a little clip with Senator Tim Scott, and he's out of North Carolina, South Carolina? Anyway, he's the only black Republican senator in the United States Senate, and he was talking about, and his grandparents were cotton pickers. They actually and then his mother was a single mother, and he was talking on this interview and saying, I want to celebrate my triumphs, that from in 2 generations I went from a cotton picker to a United States senator. I want to celebrate that. I don't want to talk about how my grandfather was held down and he didn't get his fair shake, and then my mother was a single mom and had to work 3 jobs. He said, I appreciate and I'm proud of them for that, but I also want to be able to be proud of me for, coming, 2 generations later, well, look what I've achieved. And I feel like that's what, the critical race theory wants to keep, and you're exactly right, is keep one race down and then make the other one feel, guilty or bad or evil for doing it, when really what we need to be doing is just celebrating individuals.
Kids don't see color.
Yeah, right.
Kids don't see color. Racism is a learned trait. It isn't something you're not born racist. It is a learned skill that people see from their parents or their grandparents, and it is a skill that is dead, in my opinion.
Right.
It's dead. It died 30 years ago, probably. My wife's black, and she, in the 80s and early 90s, she had instances of racism, but she has never faced systemic racism. She and I talk about this at length, and we get really into this because it's something I'm passionate about. I grew up in the UK. I didn't even think about racism until it was presented to me, I think, on a show or something. You know, I had black friends, I had Asian friends, and I never even thought of them in a different manner. I knew they were different because we are all different.
Right.
White, Asian, or even I'm different from you. I'm different from your husband. We're both white, but we're still different.
Right.
And so, we celebrated our differences, right? And so I had a Filipino friend, one of my best friends growing up. I didn't look at him like, oh, your mom's Filipino, and so therefore you're not as good as I am. No, we shared everything. We went to school together. We rode our bikes together. We played soccer together. Kids don't see race. This is something that's been perpetuated by people who have an evil intent and want to keep a certain group of people from realizing their potential. And that in and of itself is racism, in my opinion. And so the point I'm trying to get at here is that the critical race theory is having the adverse effect. It is having the opposite effect of what it is intended to do.
Right.
In fact, in and of itself, it is racist.
Right.
So when you have these initiatives and we're teaching these things to our kids, you're telling minority groups that, hey, you guys are oppressed, and there's your oppressor sitting over there reading from the same book you are. And so now this person feels like, well, is that true? Does she really not like me because I'm black? And the white child is over there saying, wow, do I really not like them because I'm black? And now they're questioning themselves when 15 minutes ago they're out in the playground playing together, not even thinking about this stuff. Right. And so you're creating division, and now what you're doing is you're making the black person hate the white person, and the white person feel like a victim. That is racism. That is what we've spent the last 80 years trying to get away from. In fact, the last couple of 100 years trying to get away from. Again, this isn't something I take lightly. If you show me an individual instance of racism, I'll stand with you. And I don't know anyone who wouldn't.
Absolutely.
And what we're saying is, no, you're just racist because you're white. I've been called racist. Okay. So how do you figure that one out? My wife's black. I must be the most self-deprecating racist in the world. So so my wife's black. Do you want to ask her how racist I am? And I'm like, okay, so now we've got that out of the way. Would you like to talk about why this is bad? No. Well, why not? We ought to be talking about why it's bad and the impact it's having on kids. And getting people to engage at that level is impossible. So how are we going to get through that when you have that kind of ideology in the legislature?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that's what, honestly, that's where, you get into the hearings when legislation is being passed or excuse me, really not being passed, what they say is dropped, and get into the hearings and having people like you come and testify. Really, that's because it's a hard. I know I would just tell you, just because I am white, I have a hard time addressing those because I'm afraid if I say the wrong thing that I'll come across as I'm racist, and I'm not. I have no there's no feelings of racism within me. And so, I feel like it has to be addressed. It's a really sensitive thing, and because we've gone this far down this road now, it's like it's really difficult to touch, to put your kind of put yourself out there for that. But that's why I think when we write legislation and we go through policy, when we do that, in that process, we need to already know who who we're going to have testify for that. And I will say that's something that the Democrats do really well. When they have policy in Olympia, while they're writing the policy, they actually know who they're going to have come in and testify in favor of that policy. And so I think that's something that the Republicans, we've kind of, we've stayed away from because we don't want to offend people. We're very conservative in so many different ways, not just fiscally, but we're very conservative in the way that we think and the way that we talk and the way that we stand up for certain issues. And so that's where I feel like, that's where it needs to be changed in Olympia, is when we're going through those policies, is we need to have, first of all, the conservative, I'm going to say Republican candidates in the House of Representatives. And then when we go talk with those, those policy makers and write the policy, that while we're writing policy, we're actually thinking about who are we going to have in and testify for our policy, so that we can bring that through the hearings and the committees. Because I have actually testified, and most of it's been business related, but I have testified in Olympia in front of committees, and that's and like I said, the Democrats are really good at, when they write the legislation that they already have, they probably have 100 people ready to testify on behalf of it. And so they just bring them in, they testify, and go forward. Where like I said, the Republicans or conservatives have been a little behind the ball on that. So when I'm looking at things like this, and it's really important, and those are issues that we absolutely need to address, because this needs to be reversed. This thought process needs to be reversed or curtailed. That's how we do it, is we get with policymakers, and we find people that are ready to testify on behalf and give personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, and it isn't me you need to hear from, because I'm just another white guy who married in this is what I can't get my head on. If America is truly racist, we have the biggest population of blended families in the United States than we've ever had before. So if we are systemically racist, how can that even be?
Right.
And I can tell you, my wife isn't oppressed. My wife has a successful cleaning business, and 100% of her client base are white. They entrust her with keys to their homes. They entrust her with garage codes, keys to their businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where's the systemic racism here? I don't see it. And the ages, it's like, oh, well, maybe they're younger, but no, their ages range from mid-20s to 60s, 70s, 80s. So where is the systemic racism here? I don't see it. And you don't need to even hear from me. I'll give you, I wrote a list down here as you were talking. So you don't need to hear from me, a white privileged guy. You need to go talk to these people. Tim Scott, Governor Youngkin's, why can I not think of the word? Assistant governor.
Okay.
I forget her name.
Deputy
governor. Yeah. I forget her name. I apologize. Denzel Washington, Lil Wayne, Morgan Freeman, Brandon Tatum, Candace Owens. The list goes on and on and on and on. The reason why I gave such a diverse list, you've got politicians in there, you got activists, you got actors, and they all come from a broad range of spectrum. They all are different. Lil Wayne is nothing like Denzel Washington. I don't like Lil Wayne's music. I can't stand it. But when I heard what he had to say about racism, I didn't expect that from him. And then, because it's grounded in reality. Right. He's not talking points. He doesn't need to talk a talking point to get media coverage or anything like that. He doesn't need that. So what does he do? He speaks truth. What does Denzel Washington do? He stands behind God, and he speaks truth. Same with Morgan Freeman. Yep. So you can't just tell me I'm being biased, I'm listing a bunch of Republicans. I'm not. I'm listing many people from all across the spectrum. So if you haven't heard the positions from these people,
Lil Wayne's the only one I haven't.
Okay. So I will. If you, not you, I'm talking in general also to the constituency. If you haven't heard their positions on racism, please go check it out, because it's invaluable, their perspectives. I think that it's just so important now that, again, we touched on this a little bit before we started the interview. These are, and I've sent an email out, these are the most important midterms in 49 years, since 1973, since the passing of Roe v. Wade. We now have the power to go and change the law and to enact initiatives and to really say, hey, we are not about this. God is not about this. We now have the power to stand behind God and say, God, you've given us back the power, and we're going to take that, and we're going to stand by you, and we're going to do what you tell us to do. And so I would just implore anyone to vote for a candidate who has the power, the capacity, and the backbone to go and vote and vote that way in the legislature and stand behind the people and stand behind life. So the one of the biggest problems that I think we're facing now too is transparency, and it's such a big issue. It's access to politicians is impossible. you will hear them talk about something, you reach out to them, you don't hear from them. So what are some of the things that you're going to work to do to inform your constituency, to meet with them, and to really just discuss the issues that are important to them? And I'm not just talking about Republicans. Across the aisle too.
Right.
We really need to stop the demonization of each other.
Absolutely.
And I know you've touched on party politics a little bit, and that does happen and it does play into it. But I think one of the big things that I've been saying to people is, guys, let's stop. Let's stop demonizing a Republican for talking to a Democrat. Let's stop demonizing a Democrat for talking to a Republican. Now it seems like you can't sit down with a Democrat without being told you're evil for sitting and talking to them. But how else are you meant to get anything done?
Yes.
You have to sit with these people.
Absolutely.
And if you spend 12 hours in a room with someone behind a locked door, you might learn a whole lot more about each other. You might disagree, but you might come out of that room and say, you know what? My entire perception on that person's changed, and I can understand, I don't agree with, but I can understand where they're coming from. I can understand who they're trying to serve, but I'm not willing to forego my values to compromise on certain things such as life. But at the very least, we need to get to that point where it's, let's stop the divisiveness.
Right.
And so how do you propose that we break through that barrier and then give the transparency to the people?
So, that's, and I've thought a lot about this, is how am I going to, go to Olympia and reach across the aisle, because that's exactly what we need to do, because we need to be able to work with each other and hear each other's, opinions. And like you said, there's certain things that we won't, that we're not going to give any ground on, but there's other things that we could compromise on. And so I thought a lot about, how are we going to do this, or how am I going to do this in Olympia? One of the things I think that in my professional career, I've been very, very good at negotiating and working with, with all sides of an issue. And for instance, I'm going to go back to the workers' comp, but we're working with the injured worker, the employer, the doctor, the physical therapist, the vocational counselor. There's all these people, these stakeholders, and so and they're all have their own agenda or their thought of how are we going to move forward with this. And so being able to work with all of those people and, listening to everything that they have to say, take, the good, the bad, the barriers, and then figure out, okay, this is the game plan. This is how we can move forward. We can take this from you and that from you and put all of those pieces together. So I've thought about that and how am I going to do that? And I think the very first thing is that I want to, introduce myself to, the folks across the aisle, and really sit down, if I can go, have coffee with them, have a 10-minute conversation just as a person, people to people, not, let's not talk politics, let's not talk issues, let's just go talk
Learn
as a person.
about each other.
Yeah. And create that, just those maybe open lines of communication, like, okay, well, I can talk to her because, she's going to listen, or she's friendly or whatever. And so, that would be one of my first things that I'd want to do as far, so that I can create those relationships, because I do think that as we see, and I have said a lot about different, and mostly because I have been in grassroots efforts and I've been working in Olympia, and so I see that, we have the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's numbers, it's a numbers game, it's like they have the majority. And so, but what I feel like we have, as in a minority party, what we've, not been real successful in is being able to negotiate and go in and say, okay, well, this, we don't like this part of the legislation, but we do like this, or we could live with it if you did this, if we could change this and make amendments. And I think that really starts with the ground floor. Is it starts with having that open communication and just a friendly, approachable relationship in the beginning, and then being able to listen. I think that's a really important thing, is that we need to listen to their side, and even if we don't agree with it, listen. And maybe we will. Maybe we go in not agreeing, but then we come out saying, okay, I get that. All right, well, let's we can put that in there.
Well, and oftentimes you agree on the issue, but just not the solution.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So,
right.
And that's the starting point, is that, okay, guys, we know there's a problem here, or we know that we need to sit down and talk about this issue. And then you start from there. You don't start from, well, I think this is the solution. No, so let's start at the issue. Okay, what are the issues? What breeds that issue? right? What breeds the issue of homelessness? There's several factors, right? So then you counter all those factors, and then you sit down and you work through it. But it seems like we're always jumping to on both sides. Right. We're jumping to the solution before we truly fundamentally understand the problem.
Right.
And I think we need to just take a step back. Our government wasn't the Constitution and the way that our governments are set up wasn't to have rapid law, rapid progress, and so on. Progress, yes, which is why we have the free market. But what I mean is rapid law, rapid restriction. It's built so that we take baby steps.
Right.
And we go like this. And then we're meant to take baby steps backwards on the things that don't work, but that never seems to happen. And one thing I would say, though, that you touched on is, how do you negotiate when one party has a majority and they can just cram through whatever they want?
So what I have learned also through my experience in not working with agencies in the state of Washington is that you need to know their rules and their issues, better or at least as well as they do. So I think it's a question of knowledge and preparedness, being prepared. Like, okay, where are they coming from? What is this idea? Why do they think this? Where did this come from? That, and then what are they following a rule? Is it a RCW? Is it a WAC? What are we looking at here? And really researching and looking into that, particular legislation or issue or whatever it is that we're addressing, and then also looking at what is the impact and how does that, how does it play out? So I guess the answer to that question is, I would say to be very I would say inquisitive, and do the research and actually do the work of finding out what is it we're looking at and how is this going to play out. But
the reality is, even with all that, and I want to say this because it's important. The reality is, even with all of that work, there are going to be things that people know are inherently bad, yet they still cram through legislature. And that's why we need balance. That's why we need to get people in there who are going to stand for God and going to stand for liberty and going to stand for the Constitution.
Right. And I think the other thing is that and to make sure that we're communicating that with our constituents as it's happening. So one of the things, and I'll use this for an example, is one of the things that happened in 2019 is when the Long-Term Health Care Act was voted into play. And that's basically it's an income tax of 0.58 cents, per dollar. And it was voted in 2019. That wasn't, communicated with constituents until really when it was communicated was in the end of 2021, right before it was going to go into effect. And then people were panicked, like, what are we going to do? We need to get private insurance, these things. But that's where I want to, this is my plan. I want to have, the open town hall meetings and have those on weekends while I'm in the legislature. So, if I can do those via Zoom, if I come home, and do those, I know that this first session is 4 months long. So, hopefully I'll be home on Saturdays and Sundays, but if not, do it via Zoom, but really have that and invite all constituents to say, okay, this is the legislation that's coming before me right now. These are the things in committee right now. This is where I see, this is where, this is what I oppose. This is what I, what I think is, that I don't, or that I'm agreeing with, that I'm supporting, and having those issues come up immediately while we're in, because I think that if, like when the Long-Term Health Care Act, when that was going through, if our legislators, if our district legislators would have came back and said, this is what's being voted in, this is what I'm seeing right now, we could have had more people, and that was in 19, so that was before the pandemic, and the hearings were open at that point. We could have had more people go over to Olympia to stand up and say, no, we don't want this. Or maybe we do want it, but it's got to be actually solvent. It actually has to work. It actually there has to be a true benefit from this. And nobody knew that. It really went on, under the radar. We didn't bring that information back. Whether we brought that information back as, newsletters or emails, I have found out in my experience with Associated Builders and Contractors that long emails, that long newsletters are not real effective. That people don't want to read that much anymore. Mm-hmm. They want to see a couple of bullets. They want to see like what is the guts, mm-hmm. and we're more effective in communicating live with people.
Right.
So having
conversational.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think
and so, and that would be my plan is while I'm in the legislature, so not just when I'm out of session, but when I'm in session, to come back on the weekends and have those town hall meetings and do that, and commit to that, to have that, whether it's every Saturday or it's one Saturday a month, but commit to doing that so that all sides can come in and I can tell them what I'm seeing. They can tell me what they're feeling and get that feedback immediately rather than wait until the legislation is passed and then send out a newsletter saying, well, this legislation was passed. We missed this opportunity. I think we need to get people engaged immediately, but then that's also on them too, is they need to become engaged.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Well, Suzanne, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you let people know where to find you and how to get in contact with you if they have any questions?
So actually, I have my cell number is actually on my website, but I'll give it to you right now. It's 509-991-5645, and that is my personal cell number. And so feel free to give me a call if you have any issues or you'd like to discuss something with me or you have ideas. And then my website is www.vote4Suzanne.com. And you can reach out to me through my website as well.
Awesome. All right. So it's vote4Suzanne.com.
Correct.
All right. Vote4Suzanne.com. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thanks.